Welcome back, everybody. We're diving into The Animal World. It's a 1956 documentary. It's not just animals running around, though. It's really a snapshot of the 50s. Culture, science, filmmaking, the whole bit. And the coolest part, it mixes real animal footage with, get this, stop-motion dinosaurs.
It's wild. They showcase, like, the whole evolution of life,
Right.
but they dance around the word evolution.
Yeah. Why do you think that is?
Well, it was the 50s evolution was kind of a hot topic, especially for certain religious groups. I think they were playing it safe, trying not to step on any toes.
Times have definitely changed.
Yeah.
Imagine science being controversial, but you're right, it really shows the cultural anxieties of the time. Didn't the producer Irwin Allen even say something about this?
Yeah. He said, hold on, I've got the quote here. We hope scientists will say this film is accurate, and yet we don't want the church picketing the film.
Wow. Talk about a balancing act. But
Wow.
hey, at least they had those awesome dinosaurs, right? Those stop motion scenes were, groundbreaking for back then.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking top-notch talent here.
Right.
Willis O'Brien, the genius behind King Kong, and his protege, Ray Harryhausen, who, well, he basically became a stop-motion legend.
A real dream team. So which dinos did they feature?
Oh, the big names? T-Rex, Stegosaurus, even the Brontosaurus?
Wait, the Brontosaurus? Isn't that, not a real dinosaur anymore?
Yeah, it's funny, right? Science moves on, but hey, the animation still holds up. Those scenes were so good they were even reused like in Trog and Night Gallery. It's cinematic history that keeps on giving.
Speaking of history, did you notice how the animal world blends science and de-religion? There's all this talk about the Bible alongside the scientific explanations.
Right, like they were trying to find common ground between science and faith. Again, very 50s.
But not everyone loved it. Some critics thought the religious stuff was a bit much, even condescending. One called it annoying, so trying to please everyone didn't really work.
Nope.
Yeah.
Great example of good intentions, maybe not landing quite right. It definitely makes the film a real historical artifact, though.
It makes you wonder what people thought back then when they saw those dinosaurs on the big screen. Must have been mind-blowing.
Totally. It probably blew people's minds. I mean, this was before nature shows on TV, right?
Mm.
For a lot of folks, this would have been their first glimpse of prehistory. Actually, speaking of those dinosaurs, apparently the budget really affected that sequence.
Really? I read they initially wanted to use, static dioramas, just plastic dinos standing there.
Can you imagine? That would have been so different. Thankfully, Ray Harryhausen convinced the producer, Irwin Allen, that animation, it just had to be animation. It would be way more captivating. And thank goodness he did.
But even Harryhausen had to make some compromises, right? I mean, stop motion, it's crazy time-consuming.
Oh, absolutely. He only has 6 weeks for the whole dinosaur sequence. 6 weeks. And the budget meant, well, he had to use puppets for some close-ups and speed up the animation, all sorts of tricks.
So maybe not his best work.
Well, not as polished as later stuff, that's for sure.
Yeah.
One critic even called the animation laughably bad compared to, his masterpieces.
Mm-hmm.
But you can still see his genius peeking through those little moments of brilliance.
That's the ingenuity for you. So the animal world, it might be a little rough around the edges, but it's a fascinating look at, well, all kinds of life, past and present. And those dinosaur scenes are a piece of history. What else struck you about the film?
The live action footage is stunning. Really beautiful for its time. The way they captured the natural world, it feels both timeless and kind of impactful,
And remember, this was before nature documentaries were a thing. For many folks, this would have been their first time seeing, I don't know, a whale breaching or a colony of ants at work.
Right, must have been quite an experience. Although we have to admit the film's portrayal of dinosaurs, it hasn't exactly aged well. We've already talked about the Brontosaurus, but there are other examples too. I mean, they even say, hold on, I have the quote.
Go for it.
The Brontosaurus is not debunked here.
Wow. It shows you science is always evolving. What's true today could be, poof, gone tomorrow.
Exactly. The animal world is a time capsule, not just for 50s film, but for how people thought about science and nature back then.
It makes you wonder what other hidden gems are out there waiting to be discovered, but hey, that's a thought for another time. It's amazing to think how much our knowledge of dinosaurs has changed since the animal world came out. Like back in '56, they thought the Brontosaurus was legit.
Right. Paleontology has come a long way. We've found so many new species in our ideas about how they behave, their biology, even what they looked like. It's all different now.
Like those feathered dinosaurs. Can you imagine trying to animate those with stop motion?
It'd be a nightmare. But it's not just discoveries, right? We have tech now that those filmmakers couldn't even dream of CT scans, 3D modeling. We can basically bring these creatures back to life, at least digitally.
It's mind-blowing. But going back to the film, The Animal World also touches on this idea of, like, humanity's relationship with nature, which, well, it feels pretty relevant today, don't you think?
Totally. Especially with, all the environmental concerns these days, back in the mid-20th century, that awareness was just starting to grow.
Hmm.
And the animal world, it kind of wrestles with this idea. Humans are part of nature, but we also mess it up.
Yeah. And you see that all through the film, these beautiful shots of nature, but then, bam, we see how humans can be destructive.
Like that whaling scene. Oof, it's tough to watch.
Oh,
But it shows how we've exploited animals, and sadly, that still happens today.
definitely a tough scene, but a good reminder that we have a big impact on the planet.
Right.
Mm.
And even though the film doesn't, condemn it outright, it makes you face those uncomfortable truths. It also stresses that everything's connected in nature, that whole balance thing.
And that message, it's so relevant today with climate change and losing so many species. We got to understand how connected everything is.
Absolutely. The animal world might be old, but those cultures about our place in nature, our responsibility, they're timeless.
It's like the film was ahead of its time in a way. But one thing that struck me was how they portrayed animal behavior. Sometimes it felt like they were giving the animals human thoughts and feelings, anthropomorphizing them, I think it's called.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
That was pretty common back then, those old nature docs. They'd use narration and editing to create these little dramas, with animals as heroes and villains.
Make them relatable to people, I guess. Giving them human motivations, even if it wasn't scientifically accurate.
Exactly. It might seem a bit, naive to us now, but back then, people were just starting to learn about animal behavior through film.
So it was a way to make it fun, to spark that interest, even if it wasn't always spot on.
Right. It was about grabbing people's imaginations, getting them to care about nature. And in that way, I think the animal world does a fantastic job. It's flawed, sure, but it's memorable.
I agree. It's a film that stays with you. Those dinosaur scenes alone are worth the price of admission. For anyone who hasn't seen it, it's like stepping back into, the golden age of stop motion.
Oh yeah, those scenes are a highlight. But the animal world is more than just cool visuals. It tackles these bigger themes: evolution, ecology, the future of life on Earth. It's got some depth.
And as we've been saying, those themes are even more relevant today. I'd love to know what audiences back then thought as they watched this. It must have been quite an experience.
Oh, absolutely. Mind-blowing even. Remember, TV was still pretty new. Most folks hadn't seen anything like this before.
It probably sparked a whole generation's fascination with dinosaurs, with the whole natural world. The impact of one film, it's pretty amazing.
It really is. It shows you the power of movies, taking us to other places, real or imagined. And sometimes that can change how we see the world around us.
Speaking of the real world, I think it's time we brought this deep dive back to the present. But before we wrap things up, I have one last question for you. If you could hop in a time machine, go back to 56 and watch The Animal World, for the first time, what do you think would hit you the hardest?
That's a tough one. But I think it'd be the spectacle, the sheer size of it all. We're so used to CGI now, nature shows on demand. But back then, seeing those dinosaurs come to life, even with kind of clunky stop motion, would have been mind-blowing.
Yeah, like being transported to another world. No wonder people were so captivated.
Exactly. And besides the visuals, I think audiences would have been, intrigued by how the film tries to tackle these big ideas, evolution, man versus nature, how everything's connected. Those are pretty new concepts for a lot of people.
It's like a snapshot of a moment in time, right? When science was shaking things up and our understanding of nature was changing like crazy.
Yeah, for sure. It reminds us that what we know now might be completely wrong later.
Yeah.
But that's what's cool about science, isn't it? It's always changing, always discovering.
Totally. And for anyone who hasn't seen The Animal World, it's worth checking out. You can find it on DVD, even as a bonus feature on the Black Scorpion DVD, I think.
Oh, yeah. Definitely worth a watch. Those dinosaur scenes are still impressive, and the whole film is a fascinating look at, how things used to be both in filmmaking and science.
And even though it's over 60 years old, the stuff it talks about, it still matters today, right? We're still figuring out our place in nature and how to protect it.
Absolutely. And who knows? Maybe people in the future will look at what we know about dinosaurs and think, wow, those folks were way off, just like we do with the Brontosaurus now.
That's a great point. It shows that learning never stops. There's always something new to discover. Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the animal world. Thanks for joining me on this journey.
My pleasure. It was a fun one.
And to all our listeners, we hope you enjoyed exploring this classic documentary with us. Till next time, keep those brains buzzing and never stop exploring the world around you.